July 20th, 19 Ilsa and I go bathing every day now. Aunt Laura is always very particular about seeing that we have our bathing suits with us. I wonder if she ever heard any faint far-off echoes of our moonlit petticoatedness. But so far, our dips have been in the afternoon. And afterwards, we have a glorious wallow on sun-warm golden sands, with the gauzy dunes behind us stretching to the harbor, and the lazy blue sea before us, dotted over with sails that are silver in the magic of the sunlight. Oh, life is good, good, good. In spite of 3 rejection slips that came today. Those very editors will be asking for my work someday. Meanwhile, Aunt Laura is teaching me how to make a certain rich and complicated kind of chocolate cake, after a recipe which a friend of hers in Virginia sent her 30 years ago. Nobody in Blairwater has ever been able to get it, and Aunt Laura made me solemnly promise I would never reveal it. The real name of the cake is Devil's Food, but Aunt Elizabeth will not have it called that. August 2nd, 19 I was down seeing Mr. Carpenter this evening. He has been laid up with rheumatism, and one can see he is getting old. He was very cranky with the scholars last year, and there was some protest against keeping him on, but it was done. Most of the Blairwater people have sense enough to realize that with all his crankiness, Mr. Carpenter is a teacher in 1,000. One can't teach fools amiably, he growled, when the trustees told him there were complaints about his harshness. Perhaps it was his rheumatism that made Mr. Carpenter rather crusty over the poems I took to him for criticism. When he read the one I had composed that April night on a hilltop, he tossed it back to me. "Pretty little gossamer thing," he said. And I had really thought the poem expressed in some measure the enchantment of that evening. How I must have failed. Then I gave him the poem I had written after I had come in that night. He read it over twice, then he deliberately tore it into strips. "Now, why?" I said, rather annoyed. "There was nothing wrong about that poem, Mr. Carpenter." "Not about its body," he said. "Every line of it, taken by itself, might be read in Sunday school. But its soul. What mood were you in when you wrote that, in heaven's name?" "The mood of the Golden Age," I said. "No, of an age far before that. That poem was sheer paganism, girl, though I don't think you realize it. To be sure, from the point of view of literature, it's worth 1,000 of your pretty songs. All the same, that way danger lies. Better stick to your own age. You're part of it, and can possess it without its possessing you. Emily, there was a streak of diabolism in that poem. It's enough to make me believe that poets are inspired by some spirits outside themselves. Didn't you feel possessed when you wrote it?" "Yes," I said, remembering. I felt rather glad Mr. Carpenter had torn the poem up. I could never have done it myself. I have destroyed a great many of my poems that seemed trash on successive readings, but this one never seemed so, and it always brought back the strange charm and terror of that walk. But Mr. Carpenter was right. I feel it. He also berated me because I happened to mention I had been reading Mrs. Hemans' poems. Aunt Laura has a cherished volume, bound in faded blue and gold, with an inscription from an admirer. In Aunt Laura's youth, it was the thing to give your adored a volume of poetry on her birthday. The things Mr. Carpenter said about Mrs. Hemans were not fit to write in a young lady's diary. I suppose he is right in the main, yet I do like some of her poems. Just here and there comes a line or verse that haunts me for days, delightfully. The March of the Hosts as Alaric passed is one, though I can't give any reason for my liking it. One never can give reasons for enchantment. And another is, the sounds of the sea and the sounds of the night were around Clotilda as she knelt to pray, in a chapel where the mighty lay, on the old Provençal shore. That isn't great poetry, but there's a bit of magic in it for all that, concentrated in the last line, I think. I never read it without feeling that I am Clotilda, kneeling there, on the old Provençal shore, with the banners of forgotten wars waving over me. Mr. Carpenter sneered at my liking for slops, and told me to go and read the Elsie books. But when I was coming away, he paid me the first personal compliment I ever had from him. "I like that blue dress you've got on, and you know how to wear it. That's good. I can't bear to see a woman badly dressed. It hurts me, and it must hurt God Almighty. I've no use for Dowds, and I'm sure he hasn't. After all, if you know how to dress yourself, it won't matter if you do like Mrs. Hemans." I met old Kelly on the way home, and he stopped and gave me a bag of candy and sent his respects to him. August 15th, 19 This is a wonderful year for columbines. The old orchard is full of them, all in lovely white and purple and fairy blue and dreamy pink color. They are half wild, and so have a charm no real tamed garden flower ever has. And what a name! Columbine is poetry itself. How much lovelier the common names of flowers are than the horrid Latiny names the florists stick in their catalogues. Heart's Ease and Bride's Bouquet, Prince's Feather, Snapdragon, Florist Paintbrush, Dusty Millers, Bachelor's Buttons, Baby's Breath, Love in a Mist. Oh, I love them all. September 1st, 19 Two things happened today. One was the letter from Great Aunt Nancy to Aunt Elizabeth. Aunt Nancy has never taken any notice of my existence since my visit to Priest Pond 4 years ago. But she is still alive, 94 years old, and from all accounts quite lively yet. She wrote some sarcastic things in her letter about both me and Aunt Elizabeth, but she wound up by offering to pay all my expenses in Shrewsbury next year, including my board to Aunt Ruth. I am very glad. In spite of Aunt Nancy's sarcasm, I don't mind feeling indebted to her. She has never nagged or patronized me, or did anything for me because she felt it her duty. "Hang duty," she said in her letter. "I'm doing this because it will vex some of the priests, and because Wallace is putting on too many airs about helping to educate Emily. I dare say you feel yourself that you've done virtuously. Tell Emily to go back to Shrewsbury and learn all she can, but to hide it and show her ankles." Aunt Elizabeth was horrified at this, and wouldn't show me the letter. But Cousin Jimmy told me what was in it. The second thing was that Aunt Elizabeth informed me that, since Aunt Nancy was paying my expenses, she, Aunt Elizabeth, felt that she ought not to hold me any longer to my promise about writing fiction. I was, she told me, free to do as I chose about that matter. "Though I shall never approve of your writing fiction," she said gravely, "at least I hope you will not neglect your studies." "Oh, no, dear Aunt Elizabeth, I won't neglect them. But I feel like a released prisoner. My fingers tingle to grasp a pen. My brain teems with plots. I've a score of fascinating dream characters I want to write about. Oh, if there were only not such a chasm between seeing a thing and getting it down on paper. Ever since you got that check for a story last winter, Elizabeth's been wondering if she oughtn't to let you write," Cousin Jimmy told me. but she couldn't bring herself to back down till Aunt Nancy's letter gave her the excuse. Money makes the Murray mare go, Emily. Want some more Yankee stamps? Mrs. Kent has told Teddy he can go for another year. After that, he doesn't know what will happen. So we are all going back, and I am so happy that I want to write it in italics. September 10th, 19 I have been elected president of the senior class for this year. And the Skulls and Owls sent me a notice that I have been elected a member of their august fraternity without the formality of an application. Evelyn Blake, by the way, is at present laid up with tonsillitis. I accepted the presidency, but I wrote a note to the Skull and Owl declining membership with awful politeness. After blackbeating me last year indeed. October 7th, 19 There was great excitement today in class when Dr. Hardy made a certain announcement. Kathleen Darcy's uncle, who is a professor of McGill, is visiting here, and he has taken it into his head to offer a prize for the best poem written by a pupil of Shrewsbury High School. Said prize being a complete set of Parkman. The poems must be handed in by the 1st of November, and are to be not less than 20 lines and no more than 60. Sounds as if a tape measure was a first requisite. I have been wildly hunting through my Jimmy books tonight, and have decided to send in Wild Grapes. It is my second best poem. A Song of Sixpence is my best, but it has only 15 lines, and to add any more would spoil it. I think I can improve Wild Grapes a bit. There are 2 or 3 words in it I've always been dubious about. They don't exactly express fully what I want to say, but I can't find any others that do either. I wish one could coin words, as I used to do long ago when I wrote letters to Father, and just invented a word whenever I wanted one. But then, Father would have understood the words if he had ever seen the letters, while I'm afraid the judges in the contest wouldn't. Wild Grapes should certainly win the prize. This isn't conceit or vanity or presumption. It's just knowing. If the prize were for mathematics, Kath Darcy should win it. If it were for beauty, Hazel Ellis would win it. And if it were for all-round proficiency, Perry Miller. For elocution, Ilsa. For drawing, Teddy. But since it is for poetry, E.B. Starr is the one. We are studying Tennyson and Keats in senior literature this year. I like Tennyson, but sometimes he enrages me. He is beautiful, not too beautiful as Keats is, the perfect artist. But he never lets us forget the artist. We are always conscious of it. He is never swept away by some splendid mountain torrent of feeling. Not he. He flows on serenely between well-ordered banks and carefully laid-out gardens. And no matter how much one loves a garden, one doesn't want to be cooped up in it all the time. One likes an excursion now and then into the wilderness. At least, Emily Bird Starr does, to the sorrow of her relations. Keats is too full of beauty. When I read his poetry, I feel stifled in roses and long for a breath of frosty air or the austerity of a chill mountain peak. But, oh, he has some lines. Magic casements opening on the foam, a perilous seas and fairylands forlorn. When I read them, I always feel a sort of despair. What is the use of trying to do what has been done once and for all? But I found some other lines that inspire me. I have written them on the index page of my new Jimmy book. He ne'er is crowned with immortality, who fears to follow where airy voices lead. Oh, it's true. We must follow our airy voices, follow them through every discouragement and doubt and disbelief, till they lead us to our city of fulfillment, wherever it may be. I had 4 rejections in the mail today, raucously shrieking failure at me. Airy voices grow faint in such a clamor, but I'll hear them again, and I will follow. I will not be discouraged. Years ago, I wrote a vow. I found it the other day in an old packet in my cupboard, that I would climb the alpine path and write my name on the scroll of fame. I'll keep on climbing. October 20th, 19 I read my Chronicles of an Old Garden over the other night. I think I can improve it considerably now that Aunt Elizabeth has lifted the ban. I wanted Mr. Carpenter to read it, but he said, "Lord, girl, I can't wade through all that stuff. My eyes are bad. What is it, a book? Jade, it will be time 10 years from now for you to be writing books." "I've got to practice," I said indignantly. "Oh, practice, practice, but don't try out the results on me. I'm too old. I really am, Jade. I don't mind a very short story, now and then, but let a poor old devil off the books." I might ask Dean what he thinks of it, but Dean does laugh now at my ambitions, very cautiously and kindly, but he does laugh. And Teddy thinks everything I write perfect, so he's no use as a critic. I wonder if any publisher would accept the Chronicles. I'm sure I've seen books of the kind that weren't much better. November 11th, 19 This evening I spent expurgating a novel for Mr. Towers' use and behoof. When Mr. Towers was away in August on his vacation, the sub-editor, Mr. Grady, began to run a serial in the Times called A Bleeding Heart. Instead of getting APA stuff, as Mr. Towers always does, Mr. Grady simply bought the reprint of a sensational and sentimental English novel at the shop and began publishing it. It was very long, and only about half of it has appeared. Mr. Towers saw that it would run all winter in its present form, so he bade me take it and cut out all unnecessary stuff. I have followed instruction mercilessly, cutting out most of the kisses and embraces, 2/3 of the love-making, and all the descriptions, with the happy results that I have reduced it to about 1/4 of its normal length. And all I can say is, may heaven have mercy on the soul of the compositor who has to set it in its present mutilated condition. Summer and autumn have gone. It seems to me they go more quickly than they used to. The goldenrod has turned white in the corners of the land of uprightness, and the frost lies like a silver scarf on the ground o' mornings. The evening winds that go piping down the valleys wild are heartbroken searchers, seeking for things loved and lost, calling in vain on elf and fay. For the fairy folk, if they be not all fled afar to the southlands, must be curled up asleep in the hearts of the firs or among the roots of the ferns. And every night we have murky red sunsets flaming in smoky crimson across the harbor, with a star above them like a saved soul gazing with compassionate eyes into pits of torment where sinful spirits are being purged from the stains of earthly pilgrimage. Would I dare to show the above sentence to Mr. Carpenter? I would not. Therefore, there is something fearfully wrong with it. I know what's wrong with it, now that I've written it in cold blood. It's fine writing. And yet, it's just what I felt when I stood on the hill beyond the land of uprightness tonight and looked across the harbor. And who cares what this old journal thinks? December 2nd, 19 The results of the prize poem competition were announced today. Evelyn Blake is the winner with a poem entitled A Legend of Abigail. There isn't anything to say, so I say it. Besides, Aunt Ruth has said everything. December 15th, 19 Evelyn's prize poem was printed in the Times this week, with her photograph and a biographical sketch. The set of Parkman is on exhibition in the windows of the bookshop. A Legend of Abigail is a fairly good poem. It is in ballad style, and rhythm and rhyme are correct, which cannot be said of any other poem of Evelyn's I've ever seen. Evelyn Blake has said of everything of mine she ever saw in print that she was sure I copied it from somewhere. I hate to imitate her, but I know that she never wrote that poem. It isn't any expression of her at all. She might as well have imitated Dr. Hardy's handwriting and claimed it as her own. Her mincing copperplate script is as much like Dr. Hardy's black forcible scrawl as that poem is like her. Besides, though A Legend of Abigail is fairly good, it is not as good as Wild Grapes. I am not going to say so to anyone, but down it goes in this journal, because it's true. December 20th, 19 I showed A Legend of Abigail and Wild Grapes to Mr. Carpenter. When he had read them both, he said, "Who were the judges?" I told him. "Give them my compliments and tell them they're asses," he said. I feel comforted. I won't tell the judges, or anyone, that they're asses, but it soothes me to know they are. The strange thing is, Aunt Elizabeth asked to see Wild Grapes, and when she had read it, she said, "I am no judge of poetry, of course, but it seems to me that yours is of a higher order." January 4th, 19 I spent the Christmas week at Uncle Oliver's. I didn't like it. It was too noisy. I would have liked it years ago, but they never asked me then. I had to eat when I wasn't hungry, play Parcheesi when I didn't want to, talk when I wanted to be silent. I was never alone for one moment all the time I was there. Besides, Andrew is getting to be such a nuisance. And Aunt Addie was odiously kind and motherly. I just felt all the time like a cat who is held on a lap where it doesn't want to be, and gently, firmly stroked. I had to sleep with Jen, who is my first cousin and just my age, and who thinks in her heart I'm not half good enough for Andrew, but is going to try, with the blessing of God, to make the best of it. Jen is a nice, sensible girl, and she and I are friendish. That is a word of my own coining. Jen and I are more than mere acquaintances, but not really friendly. We will always be friendish and never more than friendish. We don't talk the same language. When I got home to dear New Moon, I went up to my room and shut the door, and reveled in solitude. School opened yesterday. Today in the bookshop, I had an internal laugh. Mrs. Rodney and Mrs. Elder were looking over some books, and Mrs. Elder said, "That story in the Times, A Bleeding Heart, was the strangest one I ever read. It wandered on chapter after chapter for weeks, and never seemed to get anywhere. And then it just finished up in 8 chapters, lickety-split. I can't understand it." I could have solved the mystery for her, but I didn't.